Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Today, we have a new addition. We have a new member of the family that we want to include. And Vincent, I'm excited to bring in Steven Travers. My co-host, Vincent Turner, with us. Obviously, Logan Landers is our producer. Steven is going to be joining us now on a special show that we're going to call Take 5 with Steven Travers. We're going to talk about the past. We're going to talk about the present. We may even talk about the future. But for right now, Vincent, your thoughts and your impression on expanding the show, growing the audience, and having a new participant with Steve Travers.
I think today here at 100 Yards of Football, we should consider a blessing that we got a very special talent coming out of California. A guy that's got a lot of great sports books out there. The one favorite book I love that he's wrote, One Nation, Two Teams, the USC, an Alabama game of the 1970s. A terrific guy that knows all about USC from baseball to football. And we're just so blessed to have him on and be part of the family. And me being a big time USC fan back in the 60s and 70s, I can tell you right now, I'm like a kid in a cookie jar. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah. Do we christen one of your books with a champagne bottle, Stephen, while we welcome you and let you set sail along with us?
You can baptize me with water or beer or any fluid of your choice.
All right, it's all welcome. Well, Stephen, welcome to the show. We thank you. Obviously, as Vince has said, your knowledge of the sports world is so vast. You've written 30 plus books. I'm sure there's several others and other topics that you want to express as well. But part of what we want to do is get your impressions about games today, things that are happening today, the modus operandi with college and pro football here during the season. But we also want to look at the past and your knowledge, especially about a longtime Trojan in the 50s when hula hoops and Elvis were just getting started. And Chuck Berry was learning how to play this little riff called Johnny Be Good. There was a difference maker at USC, and Jess Hill, the head coach there, caught himself a golden nugget when he brought C.R. Roberts in. Tell us a little bit about C.R., where he had come from, things about him that we wouldn't know but need to in terms of our knowledge and understanding of how college football has evolved.
Well, you're bringing me back to, this book here. I think you can see this is a book that my dad gave me. It's all torn up because it's been read and reread and studied over and over the years. But it's a fabulous book about the history of USC football that was given to me by my dad for Christmas, I believe in 73. It came after USC had won the national title in 72. And this is the first time I'd ever heard of C.R. Roberts. I knew about the 1970 USC-Alabama game. I'd listened to it on the radio live, but I didn't know who C.R. Roberts was. And this was the first time that I, found out who this guy was. And so we start off, I know Vincent has talked about him, we start off USC was one of the first teams to integrate in, I think Columbia maybe had done it in 2016, but USC was way ahead of the curve as early as 1925 with Bryce Taylor, who was an All-American. And they had integrated teams. They're not really fully integrated. I believe the Jackie Robinson versus USC games of the 30s were integrated, which was quite a social statement at that time. But the next great African-American USC football player is C.R. Roberts. Now, C.R. Roberts is from Oceanside, which is right next to Camp Pendleton in San Diego County, probably 45 minutes from San Diego City proper. It's right on the ocean, as the name implies. Very patriotic town. Obviously, it's right next to Camp Pendleton. CR grew up and dreamt of going into the U.S. Army and becoming an officer, and he was actually awarded a position at West Point. And he loved, what he really loved more than anything, including football, was close order drills and these kinds of parade drills that you see when you go to a parade grounds at a military base, whether it's marching or with the guns, the weapons. This was the kind of thing he loved. He dreamt of going to West Point, becoming one of the first African-American officers. Patriotism in America was enormous at this point. This is the years right after World War II. And that's what he wanted to do. But he was on the football team, and he was extremely fast and extremely gifted. And he was recruited by several schools, most notably Jess Hill and the University of Southern California, they were a very strong program at the time. And obviously it was in his region, Southern California. He may well have not gone to USC and chosen West Point. And the big sticking point was he had problems in math. And apparently West Point was going to ask him to take some other classes or maybe spend a year at another school honing his math skills. Whereas USC, Jess Hill said, well, we'll provide a tutor for you in math so that you can work on that and still be in school and participate. And that was basically the kicker that got C.R. Roberts to decide to go to USC. CR entered USC, and it was no bed of roses. I would say that for an African-American, USC and the state of California and the city of Los Angeles was probably the best place you could be, but that was not to say that it was easy. It was a difficult time for African Americans, but it was a time of progress. Jackie Robinson had broken the color barrier. There were a lot of great African American baseball stars of the era, and some in the NFL and a few in professional basketball. And so CR, fought his way through. He dealt with the criticism. He had an early confrontation with Marv Goo. And he thought maybe there was a racial element to it. Marv Goo being, for those of you who don't know, later a legendary USC assistant, but at the time, a great player. He was the leader of the team. And CR's first reaction was, Marv maybe doesn't like me because of my color. Not true. Once the incident was over, Marv approached him as a gentleman. They shook hands and became good friends. They became lifelong friends after that. When Marv, shall we say, approved of CR, for lack of a better term, that was the key for everybody on the team because he was so well respected. So now we get to 1956, and the Trojans are playing at the University of Texas. And I've told this story before. I'll quickly go over it. CR loved music, and he loved, I suppose, jazz, rhythm and blues. And in those days, the only way to listen to it was on a radio. And there was a radio in the bus, and most of the players were probably listening to Elvis or country. But when CR got on the bus, the radio had been turned to his station, the one he wanted. And it was just a very quiet moment in which, or maybe not so quiet because of the music, but it was just nobody really had to say anything. He knew my teammates are with me on this momentous trip to Texas, the heart of Dixie, really. They get there, and they have an incident with the hotel, as so often happens in the South. And Jess Hill and the team said, no, sir, we are all staying in the same hotel. We're not, CR is not staying on the other side of the tracks, with a black pastor who lives 40 minutes out of town or whatever was usually the way it was operated in those days. Nope, he stuck to his guns. They had to leave their hotel. The hotel lost their business, and they found another one, and that's where they stayed as a team. And all of this pumped CR up tremendously, and he went out, and amid a very hostile crowd and opposition, which is different from 1970. The 1970 game, Alabama, the crowd was not really hostile. They were no more hostile than they would to any opposition team. And the players, Bear Bryant was not going to stand for that, but Texas was tough on him. And there were probably some late hits. None of it mattered. He was, the hand of God was pushing that guy 260 yards or something crazy. In the first half alone, USC swamped the Longhorns 44-20. CR did not even play in the second half. He had a great season, but the season was cut short because of a scandal with the NCAA, because USC was paying players under the table because the cost of living in apartments was so great on the West Coast. Everybody in the conference was doing it, including Stanford, but Stanford evaded the penalties by ratting out the other schools. So CR went into the Canadian Football League and then eventually the NFL, where he was part of the initial backfield for the 49ers, Y.A. Tittle, and a couple of other players who went by initials. And eventually retired from pro football, went into education, very intelligent guy, very religious fellow, and became for people like Sam Cunningham and the African-American players who starred at USC in subsequent years, a godfather, a person to look up to, and a guy never showed any hatred or he understood what he had dealt with. And he understood it was the times, and the time people have to change, and they will change eventually. And he left it in the hands of God. That's the only way I can explain it. So that was C.R. Rock. And so very quickly, I had the privilege of knowing him, interviewed him at length for two of my books, if not three, and had a magnificent dinner in 2008 at El Cholo's. Harper, I'm sure you've heard of it or been there. This is the one on Western, greatest Mexican food in Los Angeles.
Yep.
Big SC hangout. Went there with Ron Yeri, C.R. Roberts, Jeff Briegel, a couple of my USC baseball friends, and a guy named Bob Case, who had been he'd grown up next to Rod Dato in Glendale. It was Justin Dato's best friend and was the former clubhouse manager of the Los Angeles Angels. So you can imagine the stories he had to say about Bo Belinsky and Dean Chance. What a day.
Man, what a time to be a fly on the wall, Steven. I would imagine when you've got Yeri and CR and some of these other guys that have played at SC, but at different times, you being just an observer and kind of keeping the conversation, you have just a gold mine of different stories that they all may have heard for only the first time about this person's era versus what we did in our era. Was there any of that was a part of that dinner?
All of it. I mean, we discussed everything. This was right after. I mean, it's interesting, the timing. It was very much like what we're doing today. It was right after the 2008 elections, and CR was very, very happy about Barack Obama. Jeff Briegel he's a real business type guy, and he was not so happy. But we had we put aside any differences, respected each other's opinions. There was no rancor at all. It was discussed the way good, decent people should discuss politics, which happens not enough. And boy, he was just fabulous. And again, I had the great privilege. I was invited by USC to host an event in Dallas in 2016 when USC played Alabama. And we talked about my book. And so I was on a stage with Sam Cunningham, C.R. Roberts, Bill Holland, and Willie Brown, who's not with us anymore. In fact, none of them are with us except for maybe Holland. Gosh darn. But Willie Brown had been basically USC's first black tail. No, not first black tailback, because that was CR. He was the first tailback recruited by John McKay. and later became a Hall of Fame defensive back with the Philadelphia Eagles. And he was also the first black assistant coach under McKay, under anybody. One of the first in the country, really. So anyway, I mean, he offered incredible perspective. So let me think here. We had players under just Hill. We had 2 who played for McKay, and we had 3 who played for McKay and 1 who played for Jess Hill. So it was a great event. 1,000 well-heeled Trojans at this beautiful ballroom.
Yeah, I'm thinking that Briegel, I'm not sure if he played under John Robinson at all, but everybody else had more gray hair on their head, right? They were previous eras.
Briegel may have been recruited by Robinson, but he played for Tolner. And I believe All-American in 85 and 86.
I got my ages wrong. Well, real quick before Vincent chimes in, I wanted to ask, you mentioned something about the C.R. Roberts, Marv Goo situation.
Mm-hmm.
The way I look at it and can hear it, yes, it could be completely racial. And CR had that question. It also could be completely football. Hey, you did something wrong. You hurt the team. I don't care who you are, what color you are. I don't care where you're from. Fix this, and then we'll get along just fine. Was there any of that took place?
I think that's exactly how it went down. And CR had enough understanding of his surroundings and of human nature to understand it and not have blinders on and see it for what it was. This was the captain of the team. This was a leader of the team telling me this is the way we do it here at USC. It's like every running back who ever came to USC found out on their first day that when you ran a running play, this is without pads and you're not being tackled. When the play's over, you run an extra 30 yards at full speed downfield.
You get in the end zone. Yes, you do. Yep.
And you do that. And the first time you don't do it, you were told by the other running backs or whoever else, the lineman, that's how we do it. And you quickly learn. It was a similar type of scenario.
Yeah, just our tradition. This is what we do. Fascinating stuff, Steven. Absolutely amazing. And Vincent, I would imagine your comprehension, not just from a historical aspect, but just, the significance of a guy like C.R. Roberts and what he meant to college football, how it was changing in his portion of history.
When I think about C.R. Roberts, and the first time I really heard of him was actually when Mr. Travers sent me a book back in 2007 to 2008, what it means to be a Trojan. I had heard of him, but I never knew the impact that he had on college football. And the thing that stuck out to me about C.R. Roberts, even though he grew up in California, he was born in the great state of Mississippi, Tupelo, Mississippi, which is an hour where I'm from, Memphis, Tennessee. And if everybody knows on 100 yards of football, I always say it's something special in the water in Mississippi. Morgan Freeman, James Earl Jones, Archie Manning, Elvis Presley. Matter of fact, he was born in the same town as Elvis Presley. And one of the songs that he was listening while they was going to Austin was Don't Be Cruel. Who put that song out? Elvis Presley. But with Mr. Roberts, you got to look at the tradition he put to the USC tailbacks. Anthony Davis, Mike Garrett, Marcus Allen, Ricky Bell.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying? He set the tone, but I would never known. And O.J. Simpson, of course.
Mike Garrett.
Until I started really, really digging into his background.
So honestly, it was my book that taught you about him.
Yes, sir. I had heard of him, but I never really knew in depth of him. Because if you look at all the great African-American running backs that I only knew from the 50s, that made an impact on this game was really players in the South like Willie Gallimore and Al Frazier at Florida A&M, Floyd Little, Jim Brown, Ernie Davis at Syracuse, J.T. Caroline at Illinois, Tank Younger at Grambling. Those are the only African-American running backs I knew that made an impact on college football in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started studying Mr. Roberts, I said, wow, player of the year in the state of California when he came out, I believe in 53. Then he went to the same high school as the legendary, he's gone to glory, Mr. Junior Seau. So I knew it was competition there. But I'm going to leave it with this today. When you look what he did in that Texas game and what he did in the first half and what he kind of took all the words from the stands and he put 251 yards on Texas in the first quarter, 23 yards at average on the carries, at 87 and 60-yard touchdown, I would have been mad too if I was the Horns. And they had to take him out of the game because of his life. Because if he would have went back in and played in the second half, easily 400 or 500 yards in that football game. And then the one point about Mr. Roberts, 6'2", 225, but that Olympic speed, Carl Lewis, Jesse Owens, Bullet Bob Hayes. It's been a pleasure.
I love Bob.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about him in the 50s, but I put him right up there with all the gentlemen that I just mentioned. Back to you, Mr. Travers.
Well, and that goes, let me thank Don Pearson, because that's how I found out about him. So you know what? Bill Yanish asked me about writing, I think the first time I was on 100 yards of football, and I said, they're always going to need scribes to tell stories. So I look at these books that I've written and that other people have written, and something, that's where I learn it. That's where you learned it. And, people who tell these stories and do the reporting and the journalism and pass it on. So much of that is African-American tradition is telling stories. They've been, really human tradition, Jewish tradition, African-American, everybody, stories that come out of the South or wherever you're from, whether it's through music, through written words, spoken over a roaring fire in a log cabin, wherever. These are the things that propel us and teach us. And, and I look at CR and I think about him playing in that game and people throwing things and other players giving late hits. And, I think to another guy who couple thousand years ago marched down a square while people hit him and barbed him and scourged him, and he just put up with it because he had to, because he knew the importance of it, of turning the other cheek, and that this was probably something that was going through CR's mind. Like, what does it says in the Bible? It says you will be scourged and hated for me, and I think he looked at that like, okay, this is my moment, as Isaiah 13, here am I, God, let it be me. And that's probably because I know the guy was a churchgoer, and that was probably what was going through his mind. Okay, this is my moment. Everybody has their moment, one way or another. That a time for choosing, a time to stand up and be counted. And I can think of a few times I've had it, and I'm sure you all do. And this was his moment, and it was, we're still talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing story, and I didn't know much about him, and obviously you're clarifying some things. Do us a favor, Steven. We'll do it a little bit later on in the show as well. Just remind us, just tell us where are the books, and if our viewers and listeners especially want to know more about players like this, the name of the book that you showed first was Trojan, right?
Yeah. I honestly, I don't even know if that book is still found on Amazon. It's an old.
So it's called The Trojans, the University of Southern California Football, and there is information on CR in that book, correct?
Oh yeah. Don Pearson. The next great book. This was a fabulous book. This was also The Trojans, a story of Southern California football. Very similar title. This is by Ken Rappaport. I can tell you that my very first day at USC, like your very first day you're on campus, it's 100 degrees. It's a couple days before classes start. I go to the bookstore to buy all my books for class, and this book was there. And I said, I have to have that book. So I bought that along with all my school books. And sitting in a hot apartment on West Adams Boulevard, I read that entire book That's also, I don't think I knew John Wayne had gone to USC until I read that book. And it had a great chapter on CR, and it's really one of the great books ever written on. And then there's my book here. This is CR is interviewed in person in what it means to be a Trojan. So the best place to find these books is Amazon. I have my Amazon author page, Steven Travers, and these other books. I honestly don't know if Pearson's book, you might have to go to eBay to find it, and some of these books, they charge you like $300 because they're rare items. But boy, it was a beautiful book, very influential in my life.
Well, we want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity. We'll do it again at the end of the show, but if you want to learn more, and I'm sure there are plenty of books about Tennessee and Alabama and Penn State, Washington football. We will highlight players all throughout the year. That's what we want to do here, is to just remind folks, teach the history, and let the passing down of history from one generation to the next be a lot smoother with insight like this. So thank you very much for that, Steve. I mentioned Penn State a moment ago. We're going to talk a little bit about the second portion of the show is going to be upcoming games and situations that are taking place in college football. And if you don't mind, we'll begin with the Washington at Penn State game. Washington is 5-4. They're 3-3 in the conference. They're going to number 6 ranked Penn State there at Beaver Stadium in Happy Valley. I'm going to start with a question for both of you. Stephen, we'll begin with you. Some whispers were being heard before the last whistle was blown as Penn State was losing to Ohio State. The final of that one was 20-13 about James Franklin's job. I'm not saying he should be fired or anything like that, but is it too early in this season? And have we been through this before? Ohio State is a very, very good football team, and their chances of winning the national championship are as high as anybody right now, including Georgia. Why are people so upset about the Nittany Lions one more time ending up not being able to get through that portion or that division of their conference?
Well, unless they know something I don't know, unless there's something going on with James Franklin that I'm unaware of. He has been an outstanding coach at Penn State for a long time, going back to when USC played him in the Rose Bowl in 2017, but he's beaten us, I think, a couple of times since then,
including 2 weeks ago in overtime.
Yeah, he beat us in overtime, and I think there was another loss, maybe one of the other bowl game. I think we may have lost to him in the Holiday Bowl at some point. But anyway, coming from the USC's perspective, this whole thing about firing coaches, the next guy is going to do better. I think that's usually not the case. These coaches, they're good coaches. Some are better than others. I don't know whether the problem is with X's and O's, but, as far as what he's done with that program, he's got unbeaten until they play Ohio State. And like you mentioned, Harper, Ohio State is as good as anybody in the nation. It certainly seems to be, in a year where it's, I think, a much more even playing field post Nick Saban. And I think Penn State has as good a shot as anybody at this point. Unless they fold, they should be in the final in the playoffs among the 12 teams, even if they lose another game. But they don't want to do that. They want to have as good a record as they can to go into the conference title game and the playoff, to be seeded as highly as possible. But these fan bases are absolutely crazy. They just have extremely high standards for their team. And if Penn State has a history of Joe Paterno and unbeaten teams and national championships, and when that gets into your bloodstream, you're expecting nothing less, any of these top tier programs. So I think that's what's going on at Happy Valley.
Vincent, do you think there's any of the 800-pound elephant that's in the room that Penn State is literally waiting for something to happen on a football perspective that takes Joe out of what happened in the past, the Sandusky situation, all that? I would think at least a little bit, that still resonates. And I think a national championship or something great for Penn State football would eventually wipe that away. Is there any truth in that, at least in your opinion?
I totally agree with that, because when you look at Penn State overall, look at the history in the 60s and 70s. There was a premier program under Joe Paul. Franco Harris coming out of the program, Lydell Mitchell, they won a national championship with Todd Blackledge in the early 80s. And let's face reality here. Penn State, when Joe Paul left, they didn't live on good standing. And then they went through some years that we're not used to seeing them losing. But now you talking about getting rid of Franklin. What I look at the Penn State fan base is that don't ask what you want, because if you replace that young man, you're going to ask for some losing coming behind that. And to me, I'm going to say this to the Penn State football nation. You insane. Insanity goes deep from a definition standpoint, because this man, look what he did at Vanderbilt down here in the SEC before he went to Penn State. He was beating Georgia. He was being competitive. He had Vanderbilt as a bowl team and was recruiting excellent out of the South. And I tell you a true story. I'm not going to put the young man's name out there, but he was recruiting a guy from Griffin, Georgia, that ended up going to Georgia. And the young man decided not to go to Georgia, went to South Carolina. And I know the young man's father personally. And you know what he told me? He said, of all the coaches that recruited my son, James Franklin was the most impressive. Because James Franklin didn't come in and try to sell him any apples and oranges. He said, you come play with me, son. Number one, I'm going to train you to be a man and you're going to get your degree at Vanderbilt. Number two, you're going to be an outstanding citizen. And look what he's done at Penn State. Even though they haven't won the big game, I get that. They've lost to Ohio State. They lost to Michigan. But they're always in the top 10. And can I talk about the players in the NFL right now that's playing at a high level? Jody Porter Jr., corner at Pittsburgh. Chop Robinson, an outstanding rookie for Penn State that's with Miami. He's putting players in the pros, and he's got the program where it's at. And hold up, Penn State fans. Please hold up, as Mr. Travers says. The season is not over with yet. You're going to be in the college football playoffs, and this is Mr. Franklin's best team, and who knows? On January the 20th, we might be talking about Penn State hosting up the trophy. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, I think it's way too early. Georgia fans here in the state of Georgia will remember very vividly that the Mark Richt cries to get rid of him after they lose in the middle of the season to either Clemson or South Carolina or Florida. It didn't matter. If they lose any one of those games, they brought a sharpening stone with them so that the axe that they had in the other room could be nice and ready to go to let that man. Boy, what a interesting perspective. But winning breeds that. 9-3 or 10-2 was not good enough at Georgia. And I'm sure, Steven, you know that's not exclusive just to Georgia or at Penn State. That's everywhere.
Yeah, you would bring up Mark Richt. So I was talking to my pastor's wife, and my pastor played football for Vince Dooley at Georgia in the mid-1980s. I think he might have been a freshman when Herschel was still in the program. And I said, hey, you must be really happy with, the Georgia Bulldogs. And she goes, oh, well, Rod really hasn't particularly liked this coach and hasn't really liked the program as much since they fired Mark Richt, because, Mark Richt was a man of honor and principle. And not that the following coaches aren't, as far as I know. Sometimes I don't want to know everything. Back in the day, I can remember, just to give you one example, being an SC guy when USC went 9-3 with Marcus Allen in 1981, and he won the Heisman Trophy. They were probably as good as anybody in the country that particular season. Just had a couple of upsets, but it wasn't good enough, And John Robinson was gone shortly thereafter. And, these kinds of programs that have those kinds of traditions, 6-4, 9-3, it is not good enough. It might be good enough at Cal or Stanford or someplace, but not the great marquee programs. Certainly not in the SEC at Georgia, Alabama, maybe Clemson, ACC team. It's just that's what the standards are.
Yeah, and I would think at Penn State now as well. I mean, they had so many years from when either Joe Paterno first joined in the 60s up until his absence from the campus. It was we're number 8 or we're number 6, we're number 12. We lost there at the end to Pitt or somebody. It was constantly. It was a 1 or 2 loss season that could have only been better had we not had we not lost that last game. How close do we need to get before we finally win a natty? And that would have been with Blackledge. I can't remember. Was that against Miami, Vincent?
No, that was against Georgia in the Super Bowl against Herschel. It was Herschel's last year.
Penn State's first one, but didn't they win the one with Blackledge? Was that a little bit later? Was that with Georgia?
Yeah, Blackledge, they won in the Sugar Bowl, and after the 82 season, and then some years down the road, that's when they upset Miami, and Miami had that great team with Jerome Brown and
that was the Fiesta
Smith. That was in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah. Okay. So I got my years mixed up. Forgive me for that. Well, let's switch over before we go to the next game. Real quick, Washington. Last year, they're in the national championship game. I think that Michael Penix was injured. He wasn't 100%. They still played well, but they didn't play well enough to beat Michigan. Obviously, Michigan went through a heck of a lot right now. They lost so many seniors and upperclassmen to the draft. And, I don't think there were many portal guys that they lose, but Michigan is obviously struggling. Is there any of that, Vincent, in your opinion, of what Washington's going through?
Of course. I mean, think about it. You lose Kalen DeBoer, who was recruited real well out there in the Northwest and on the West Coast. All of a sudden, he's the Alabama coach. He takes some players with him. Yep. Then you got to scramble. You got to scramble to find a head coach because remember, DeBoer got hired in January. When everything was set, we didn't even think Nick Saban was going to retire. So, of course, you take players out of that situation, Washington, and bring in Jed Fish, who I think is an excellent football coach in what he did at Arizona. Then you got a new quarterback in Will Rogers out of Mississippi State. That's going to be some transition, man. But I'm going to say this about the Huskies football program. Even though they're 5-4, they lost 2 games this season that I've seen them play in. They ran Rutgers up and down the field, outgained them like 400-some yards to 2-some, and they ended up losing that football game. And then against Washington State, they had some key turnovers, and I believe in that football game, they got stopped on the goal line. So you take those 2 games there, we're talking about a whole different situation with Washington. But I think the Huskies are going to be all right in the Big Ten because you know why? They got that tradition. Don James, Sonny Sixkiller, Warren Moon. And they get good football players out of the Seattle area. I think the Huskies are going to be all right. That's my opinion.
Stephen, when I was in Los Angeles, I'm sure you in Northern California, you're going to talk about the SC, Stanford, Cal, UCLA, maybe even some San Diego State football. But whenever there's movement up north between either Oregon or Washington, there's a tremor. And people talk about what's going on up there in Seattle with Washington. That hasn't changed, has it? I mean, whatever Washington does up north, there's still folks all around the Pac-12 nation that are very familiar with the sounds that they make, the movements that they make, and the results that they get.
Well, Washington and Oregon are always going to compete for recruits. And because they're right next to each other, so they're going to recruit. They're going to compete first and foremost in the Pacific Northwest. There is more talent in Washington than there is in Oregon, so Oregon has to snatch a couple. It's kind of like Michigan and Ohio State. Ohio State has more natural talent in their state than Michigan. So Oregon has to snatch a few guys, and then they're always competing. If you look at the history of both schools, many of their great stars are from California. And so Washington has to do that. Right now, it's not often that Washington and Oregon are both, at the top of the the college football rankings. It's usually one or the other. Last year it was Washington. This year it is Oregon. I'm a little surprised that Oregon has been as good as they have and has survived the rugged Big Ten as well as they have. And they've kind of gone against one of my tenets, which is that the West is not producing the kind of athletes that they used to. And we're not able to compete with, say, the SEC or the Big Ten, for that matter, like we would have some years ago. I mean, there was a time where if USC had entered the Big Ten in 1972, they would have, they really would have run the table on that conference. They were better than Ohio State and Michigan. And because at that particular time, they were far more advanced in terms of the way they threw the football and their play calling. The Michigan, Woody and Bo were, still 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But those days are over. These coaches, they hire great technical offensive coordinators who are at the top of their game and come up with a lot of new twists and turns. And the way college football is, when you come up with something, whether it's the air raid offense or what Mike Leach did in Texas A&M and Washington State and other schools, it lasts for a couple of years and then someone figures you out. It was like figuring out the wishbone. That was, the new thing. But, eventually there's ways of putting a spy on the running back or the quarterback and knocking that back a little bit. But they have a new coach at Washington and they're struggling, but they're doing better than USC. And I think they're a good, strong team in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they've done pretty well. They've had some losses, especially on the road in the Big Ten. Their most recent, in the last 5 games, they're 2-3. They lost at Indiana. Indiana's ranked number 8 right now. Lost at Iowa and at Rutgers. So those are going to really knock you out. Real quick stats. Will Rogers, their quarterback, 2,284 yards. He has 13 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Jonah Coleman, they're going to have to watch out for him, their running back, 889 yards for that young man. So if he has a good game, he'll probably break 1,000 for the season. 7 touchdowns for him. He's averaging 6.3 yards per carry. But the thing that makes it very unique for me, I'm looking at the stats. Penn State averages 30 points a game. That's right in the middle of the NCAA average, right? They're 52nd ranked, but they're number 8 in the country on the defense. They only give up 15 points a game. I think that'll be a difference maker. Let's look at our next game, if you don't mind. We're going to look at the non-Power 5 Mountain West Conference, and we're going to talk a little bit about Boise State. Nevada, the Wolfpack is going to end up going to visit with the Broncos. That game is on Fox Network at 8 o'clock. We all know the reason that we're watching Boise State. Vincent, I'll start with you. Is there anything other? I mean, Maddox Mason is having a fantastic year, but compared to Ashton Jenny, he is taking the back seat. There's a new sheriff in town, if you will, and the Broncos have one of the best running games in the country. They're number 4 overall, but they by far have the best running back.
When I think about Boise State, I think about when Chris Peterson was there and he had them on that rise. And I said, well, Boise State, when he left and became the head coach of Washington, me personally, I said, Boise State finna take a step back. But now it shows you get that one special player, how much he can mean to you in college football. And then you look at Ashton Gente. And when I look at him, it makes Boise State a very serious football team. Think about when Boise State played Oregon. He put 180 on Oregon. And then you look at the young man. I like his story. He's from Frisco, Texas. You know what Frisco, Texas is about? That's the Dallas Cowboys training camp. Mm-hmm. But the young man's father was a naval officer over in Naples, Italy. So the young man played 2 years of high school football in Italy. But no question about it, Harper. That's why I watch Boise State, because when I see Mr. Gente, I see a combination of Walter, Dorsett, and the young man Barry Sanders out of Wichita Falls, Kansas. This gentleman is the best college football running back that's came on the college football level in a long time. And one thing about Boise State, when we're talking about coaches, we need to take notice of Spencer Donaldson. Remember that name, Spencer Donaldson. Boise State has got a real nice program, real nice head coach, and a lot of people saying Ashton Gente might be the best player in the country, such as the Heisman. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, he's something else now. Vincent just explained why he watches the game. If you're going to watch Boise, it's because of the blue turf, right? Is that the only reason that you're going to turn in and watch the Broncos?
Well, this particular game, Nevada is my other alma mater. Before I went to USC, I pitched for the Nevada Wolfpack back in the day, and then went into the pros, and then finished up at USC. So I have a soft spot in my heart for the Wolfpack. In fact, I was at a Wolfpack game in September, sitting with my good friend Tony Shanks, who's got a fabulous luxury box at Mackey Stadium in Reno. So that was a great day. They beat Eastern Washington. As for the blue turf, I'm a little bit nonplussed about the blue turf. I suppose you know the guy who just loves Boise and will talk about them forever is our good friend Mike McDowd. I mean, he loves these kinds of programs, that are mid-level. They're not quite USC or Penn State or Alabama or somebody like that. And I have a soft spot in my heart for him too, having played at Nevada, and that kind of program can give a guy who's not as heavily recruited a chance. And so, speaking of this great player that Vincent was talking about, he's not the only great American athlete who had previously lived in Italy. A fellow by the name of Kobe Bryant lived in Italy and spoke Italian, and came back to the United States as a more worldly person, and probably a little more able to handle, say, the pressures of the media and everything that he had to face. But this is a long-time rivalry. These teams have been playing each other. Fresno is one of these teams that has been in the mix in this kind of a rivalry. But Boise is back. You mentioned Chris Peterson. They were strong, and they're strong again. So I think that's where the money is.
Yeah, Chris Peterson paved the way for them in that Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma to be, wow, this was fun to watch. What an amazing team. Well, they're fun to watch as well. They're leading the nation in scoring right now. Boise is. They average 48 points a game. They were just a possession, if you will, short of taking on Oregon and beating them. It's amazing how good they are. Now, they're not going to be playing teams like Oregon every week, but the fact that they played them as well and as tight as they did there in Eugene, I thought that was very impressive. And the thing that also might be noteworthy of why we're going to start talking about them now is as the 12-team playoffs start to develop, guess who the non-Power 5 representative might be? Right now, you're looking at Boise State. It might be Army. They're ranked high. There could be another one in there, but the early favorite, Vincent, has got to be Boise.
No question about it. I mean, when you look overall, their football team, like I said, go back to the Oregon game. That's what made me a believer. And I'm going to tell you this. I believe they will be the non-Power 5 team that makes the college playoffs. Got a special player. I love their coach. I love everything about the program right now. And it showed you that it'll be a team I wouldn't want to see in the college football playoffs if you put the Oregon film on. Because let me tell you something, they had the Oregon Ducks on the ropes. And Eugene.
Completely agree. Well, let's talk a little bit about Oregon. Our next game that we want to talk about is Maryland at 4-4. They'll be heading to Eugene against the number 1 team in the nation. And my question to you, Steven, would be, we talked a little bit about Washington and their preparation. We haven't mentioned UCLA. They have folded the tent. I don't think they have a Big Ten win yet. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful of the program. It's just, hey, we're going to be playing different people in different situations. We're going to be going back east in ways that we've never done that before. SC has struggled a little bit. Oregon has seemed to me to to be the team that is new to the conference, obviously because of their record, but I think they were built for a way that we may not be able to stop you, but you may not be able to stop us. It may be a last possession, and that they played that to their advantage. Your thoughts on Oregon right now?
Well, I mean, at this point, you really have to consider their place in the historical context. Now, Oregon has never won a national championship in college football, but they have been to the title game, and they have had teams that have competed. And this is their best shot that I've seen Oregon have at least since 2010. And they've had good teams since then. They're fast, they're well coached, they have rabid fans. And if there was any trepidation heading into the Big Ten, that's gone now. I mean, they're the team that's being feared. So they're playing this is a home game, I assume, against Maryland. Yeah, so that's a huge advantage for, especially with this new configuration that you got to cost 3 time zones to play a football game in college. I don't think you get as much time to travel and acclimate yourself as the pro teams do. In fact, I think sometimes even the pros, depending upon the nature of the schedule, even stay over, and don't even go back home.
I'm going to correct you, Steven, real quick. They leave early. They'll go a day early. They'll leave on Friday. The pros will.
They'll leave on Friday for a Sunday game.
Yes.
Okay.
San Francisco was known to do that. For example, when we talk about the Niners, when they go to Tampa, in certain cases, they would leave Friday, acclimate on Saturday, play Sunday, and then head home.
Okay. And the colleges leave on a Thursday?
No, they leave on. Generally, they leave on Friday. They don't have the cash to spend an extra day in a hotel. So you leave Friday afternoon. You land. You go in a hotel. You have a couple meetings. Next, you get up and you play.
Yeah. Well, they used to leave Thursday. I mean, as I recall. So that's new. That's tough. That's a tough way to go, especially depending upon the time of the game. And this one is a 7 p.m. Eastern, so it's a little bit of time to acclimate. But Maryland's going to have their work cut out for them. But they showed me a lot when they played the Trojans. They beat USC. I mean, that was a huge victory for the Maryland Terrapins. When you think of, I was joking back and forth with my friends, like, who's leading this victory? Lefty Drizel, I'm thinking of them as a basketball school, but, that's almost the school where Joe Namath played, by the way. A lot of people don't know that.
Yes, sir.
Namath was going to Maryland. He played pool the day of his examination. He had to take an examination to get into school. He went out drinking beer and played pool, didn't study, and didn't make it. So the Maryland coach called up Bear Bryant, who apparently didn't have a test to get into Bama in 1961. So that's why he's not a Maryland Terp. But they were, they've always been one of these programs that has been on the cusp here. They entered the Big Ten. They're making more money than they were before. They're a basketball school, so that's one of the reasons they probably wanted them for the Big Ten. And Oregon, Oregon has brought a lot of panache with them. They got all that, that Nike money is going in.
Phil Knight University. Vincent, your thoughts?
I'll be honest with you. I'm very impressed with Oregon, man. I'm gonna look in the camera, quack quack, up there in Eugene. When you talk about Oregon, you got to give credit to one name, Dan Lanning. I never thought when he took the job that he'd have Oregon playing at this level, especially his first game when they got blew out by Georgia down over there in the Mercedes-Benz Dome. Remember that? His first game as a head coach. But the young man has proved to me he can coach on this level. And I want to give him more shout out because at one time in 2015, he was in the 901 Memphis, Tennessee as the recruiting coordinator and the inside linebackers coach. Shout out to my hometown, Memphis, Tennessee. But when you look at Oregon, Dan Lanning made a smart move. In this game, you got to have a quarterback that's going to play at a high level. I want to know what the University of Oklahoma is thinking about today, fellas. The man from Hawaii, I call him Hawaii 5-0, Dylan Gabriel. If he was at Oklahoma, what would Oklahoma be right now in the SEC? But look, he came to Oregon, and that's why Oregon is number one. And Oregon, make no mistake about it, they got NFL talent all over the field. Evan Stewart, Taz Johnson, Jordan Birch. That was at South Carolina, one of the best rushing pass rushers in the 2025 NFL draft. That Oregon team, I'm going to tell you, they showed me some when they beat Ohio State. And what really impressed me, they were stronger than I thought they were on the line of scrimmage. Because that was a real physical football game. That was my mind test with Oregon. This is a very good football team, man. Dan Lanning has really got it going on. And when you look at all these potential schools that might need a head coach, Mr. Travers, USC might need one at the end of the year. I think maybe that Nike money might be going against some of y'all alumni money at USC because Dan Lanning will be very successful if he was coaching at USC. Back to you, Harper.
Well, I'll tell you one thing about what Oregon has done that I think that is superb compared to everybody else. They call it the reveal, and they've been doing it for years. A lot of folks like me, I almost don't want to watch Oregon because I don't know what uniform they are and I don't know who's playing. If I turn, I've got to find out who's on the scoreboard first before I see whether or not they're wearing their all whites, whether they're wearing their old Kelly green and gold uniforms, if they've got the new hunter green, whether or not they're going chrome. But the kids love it. And that's the thing. All the recruits that they have, the kids that they want to talk about, they blip it out on these phones. On Friday night, they reveal what their uniforms are going to be. And the kids go bonkers. They love it. They think, oh man, they're going to have the chrome bird feather, the duck feather, or they're going to go with the duck that looks like he's a World War II comic book character that's a fighter pilot. They go with just the O that they had back in the 70s and 80s. That, to me, is one of the best things that they could have ever done. You take Phil Knight's money, you get your facilities upgraded to where they're second to none. It's still Oregon. It's going to rain, but you got a place to go where the kids are special and they love it. It's unique. And then what are we going to wear? And the kids in high school all over the country, they get this little fax right after they're done playing. And they go, hey, man, did you see what I saw? Amazing. So I think they were as prepared as anybody to make the move to go into the Big Ten. And right now, obviously, they're hitting it with both barrels. Congratulations to Oregon. I think they'll win this game. They've only got a couple more left that are against ranked opponents anyways, and they should be playing for a national championship. They should be in. But let's go to the pros now, if you don't mind, guys. Let's switch it over. Our first game in the NFL that we want to talk about are your 49ers there, Steven. 4-4 right now. They'll be traveling out here this way to Tampa. At 4-4 with the talent, the skill set, well, the ability. I know there have been some injuries, but are things okay in San Francisco? Does Shanahan have everything that he needs right now? He's got the right GM. He's got the right coaches around him. He's got the right players. Is there any whispers about what on earth is going on with the 49ers? Or is it more of a just be patient, guys? As Aaron Rodgers used to say, just relax. We got this. We'll be just fine, and we don't have to worry about Arizona. What are your thoughts about the Niners right now, Steven?
Well, you got the two problems with them have been the holdout by Ayuk, and now he's injured. So that's consternation right there. And then McCaffrey had an injury. And so that threw Brock Purdy off. And he's a good quarterback, but Brock Purdy is not he's not a guy like, I don't know, Donovan McNabb or any number of Michael Vick or some guy who can just take over a game and overcome a lot of mistakes with his running or just his extraordinary athletic ability. He's a fine quarterback, but he needs all his cylinders exploding at once. And that's not what is happening. The good news for the 49ers is that they play in a division that nobody has broken open. So they're right in the hunt. And I will be able to give you a up close and personal look at the 49ers in less than a month when my family and I travel to Buffalo to see the Bills play the 49ers in Buffalo in cold weather, which is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. I was hoping before the season started that this would be the Super Bowl preview game. Still might be. It's still possible. Last year the 49ers lost 3 straight games and then rallied. So there's these pro football, this 17-game season. It is it's still an open season. They could easily finish, 11-6. That gets you in, especially in their conference. That wins their conference probably. So they're going to need to play at the top of their game, second half of a season, have some people who have injuries come back, and get Purdy locked in with his receivers and his offense. That's what they're going to need.
Steve, thank you, Steven. I appreciate that. And Vincent, kind of the same question to you. I mentioned the general manager, the coaches, obviously the players. They're as talented from top down as any organization in professional sports. Is there something to worry about or be concerned right here? Or like Steven's saying, it's they'll get it taken care of. What are your thoughts?
I like to say, first and foremost, I really appreciate Mr. Travers' honest answer. He mentioned Brock Purdy. I respect that for 100%, because a lot of people saying Brock Purdy was the next coming of Joe Montana. And I was just kind of flabbergasted with that comment. But it's simple to me. San Francisco's got a lot of good parts offensively and defensively. But, man, they got the best player in the game that's coming back this week. The young man out of Stanford, who dad played in the league and got 2 Super Bowl rings with the Denver Broncos and 1 with the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey is a difference maker. Christian McCaffrey is impact. Once he gets back in the lineup, I think Frisco is going to be all right, and they're going to go on a run. Because think about his talent level. He's a guy that can get you yards on the ground, but he's good out of the backfield catching the ball. And that is real seriously helping the quarterback. If you think I'm telling the field what happened when he left Carolina, Cam Newton went into retirement. Back to you, Harper.
And Carolina has been in the basement of the NFC South until this past week. They're now tied with the Saints because they ended up beating the Saints last week. But you think they're not having second thoughts about getting rid of Christian McCaffrey the way that they did stuff? Real quick, the 49ers, they're 4th in the league in throwing at 253 yards. They're 4th in the league in rushing. They're 2nd in the league in scoring. But the difference right now, in my opinion, is their defense. They give up 22 points a game, and they're in the bottom half there. They're ranked 22nd. If I were Brock Purdy or a coach of Brock Purdy, and I'm talking, what do we need to do? Well, when he first gets in the league, you got Ayuk, you got Debo, you got McCaffrey, you got George Kittle. Just get the ball to one of those guys, and we'll be just fine.
Yes, sir.
Because of injuries and everything. Now, George has picked up the pace a little bit. Obviously, he can. He's good enough to be able to do that. But just get the ball to the right guys. You got a chance. In Tampa, Baker Mayfield, look at his numbers, right? He's 23 touchdowns and 1 interception. Those are video game numbers from a guy. Absolutely amazed at how good. I'm sorry, the 23 touchdowns, he's ranked number 1 in the NFL. I am sorry, that was the one. He has 9 interceptions. Please forgive me there. But they're top 5 in terms of their throwing the ball, top 10, exactly at 10th with rushing it, and scoring their 5th. So Tampa at 4-5 with that Monday night loss that they had against Kansas City. I think they can't wait to get back out on the field and get that bad taste out of their mouth. They need to win a ball game and to be able to catch the Falcons in the NFC South. So Tennessee at 2-6 will be our last game that we're going to talk about with the LA Chargers. And the reason I wanted to bring up the LA Chargers is not just because of the West Coast, but they picked 5th overall in the draft last year. And now they are 5-3, and they are looking at a wild card spot. I don't think they're going to win the division. Kansas City is still undefeated, but what a difference in the Chargers camp right now. Vincent, let's start with you. I think this is a game that they should not have a problem winning, but they're playing bigger, they're playing faster, they're playing stronger, they're playing better defense with Jesse Minter there as their defensive coordinator, but they're putting it all together in a way that I think they're playing more confident.
What can you say? The young man from Michigan, he told y'all he was going to win a national championship. It took him, 9 years to win that. He had success when he was coaching in Frisco. Jim Harbaugh is a very successful coach, man, and a very successful player off the field. Much respect on his name. Did I think the Chargers will be where they at right now? I'll be honestly, no. But right now, that's a good football team. And you just mentioned a guy that I love on their coaching staff, and I didn't know he was at Georgia State, Jesse Minter. Man, he's got to be one of the good young coaches that's coming up in this game. And the one thing that's more impressive about the Chargers is that they're playing defense. Khalil Mack is playing like he just got in the league. Derwin James out of Florida State is maybe the best safety in the game. This is a very good football team. And Justin Herbert, even though he's not putting up the numbers, but you know what he's doing? He's playing good, solid football, doing what a quarterback supposed to do. Take what the defense give you. We're going to run the ball. They brought over the young man from the Ohio State, J.K. Dobbins, and that's why the Chargers are very successful. But Jim Harbaugh, respect on your name, brother. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, I think the change. And Steven, your opinion. I'm going to put Washington a little bit above the Chargers because it's 7-2 after picking second in the draft last year. I think what's going on in Washington right now is amazing, but I think they're also on house money. I think they're way ahead of where they should be. But the Chargers organization, what's your thoughts and what are you hearing out west?
Well, Jim Harbaugh is, as Vincent said, a winner. He's been a winner everywhere he's ever gone. Coaching is in his blood. Playing was in his blood. And I knew when he came to the Chargers, he was going to turn that team around, and they, I mean, they're just doing it. You mentioned Khalil Mack. That guy's been in the league, 12 years? I mean,
yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
And that's a long time for a guy who plays that position. So that's team leadership. We were talking about Oregon, and Justin Herbert is a former Duck who is taking to the Harbaugh offensive strategy and playing the position the way Harbaugh played it. Harbaugh was not necessarily, lighting it up like, a Joe Namath or, Kenny Stabler, but he was a winner and he knew how to handle an offense. So, and the other thing I can't help but like Harbaugh's personality. Before the season, I read an article in the LA Times. I think Harbaugh was just before they went to training camp, and I think Harbaugh was buying a house in Los Angeles, and before the house was ready, he was living in a trailer. He parked the trailer down in Malibu or someplace, and they went out to this trailer. Said, Coach, how do you like living in this trailer? And he said he was living there because his favorite show growing up was the Rockford Files. And, Jim Rockford, played by James Garner, lived in this trailer, with this group of oddball people, and I just love that show. So anybody who loves the Rockford Files is okay by me.
Yes.
I'll make lemonade out of lemons until my house gets built. But everywhere he's been out in California, especially San Diego, then he goes to Stanford. I still remember him walking out on the field after Stanford beats SC. And I'm not saying this to dig, but in the Coliseum, and he and Pete Carroll shake hands, and Pete gave him a look. I don't know exactly what they said, but things changed.
Yeah.
They scored a touchdown late in the game, and I don't think Pete liked it. And Stanford stood up to the bully in a way that I hadn't seen done before, or at least, whatever. And he initially got my respect, even though I'm cheering SC on. I'm going, that kid, this Harbaugh guy, who actually I played with in Baltimore. He's not a kid. We're the same age, but I'm just saying he did something. You just knew it. There was something different about it. He's got those sayings, like, who's got it better than us? And everybody says, nobody. I get it. That can get old after a while, but the guy can coach. He takes the 49ers to the Super Bowl. Great success at Michigan. It was hard. It wasn't easy to get over that hump to beat Ohio State and to get in the game, and they got humiliated 2 years ago. But last year they win it all, and he just soaked it up as if to say, I knew we were going to be able to do it. I wish we could have done it 3 or 4 years earlier, but we got it done. And then he cuts out and takes the job in San Diego, and he starts all over. He's amazing to how quick he resets himself. But all the appreciation. Let's look real quick at the numbers, if you don't mind. We mentioned the Charger defense. They're number 1 right now in the league. They only give up 12 points a game. They only score 19. So it's one of those deals. They better score at least a touchdown early in the game so the defense has something to get themselves set for. But Ladd McConkey, we haven't mentioned him. NFL protege, history, rookie out of the University of Georgia. He has 35 receptions right now, 4 touchdowns for him. And J.K. Dobbins, as Vincent mentioned, he's got 6 touchdowns. Justin Herbert has 10 touchdowns with only 1 interception. The Chargers are for real, and they've got a couple of big important games in the division with the Raiders, Broncos, and, of course, with Kansas City. So final thoughts about what we're talking about here, Vincent. Let's finish up and wrap up the football portion of it with the games this week.
The Chargers are a playoff team. As far as our college football segment, the Oregon Ducks, quack, quack. They deserve to be the number 1 team in the country. And finally, I'd like to say welcome to 100 Yards of Football, the young man from California, by way of USC, Mr. Steven Travers. Thank you today.
Thank you, and fight on.
Steven, your thoughts about this week, and do us a favor when you conclude with that, just give us a quick little reminder. There's a couple of books, What It Means to Be a Trojan, that's one of them. Let everybody know where they can get those and just the title and the author, because a couple of them are not your books, but ones that helped you to do your research.
Well, you have What It Means to Be a Trojan. That's by Steven Travers. Then you have The Trojans, A Story of Southern California Football by Ken Rappaport. You have also The Trojans, Southern California Football by Don Pearson. And you have, I said, What It Means to Be a Trojan. Then you have, my favorite, Vince's favorite, One Night,
Absolutely.
Alabama versus USC and the game that changed the nation. This is from Taylor Trade. I ask people to go to my Amazon page, but really, something, get to know me and find me on Facebook. I'm engaging. I will answer your questions. I'm easy to find and to discuss. You got a question about anything in football or baseball or what have you, ask it and you shall receive. But let me just say real quick. We were talking about Harbaugh and Pete Carroll. A couple of points. One, when Harbaugh met Pete Carroll on the midfield after Stanford beat USC in 2007, he'd run up the score on the Trojans with a late pass and some. He didn't run into the line. So Carroll's question is, "What's your deal?" So that became a big catchphrase. The other thing we hadn't talked about, you were mentioning it. Is there anything going on with the coaching? I don't know if you know this. I'm sure you do. Pete Carroll has taken a job as a professor at USC. He has an office at USC. He's there like every day or almost every day. Don't ask me how the coach Lincoln Riley feels about Pete Carroll just kind of being there. but I've already started to see his name bandied about among the Trojan social media. Like, it won't be, you don't have to look real hard to find a replacement because Pete Carroll is there. So
Yeah.
I don't know what to say beyond that.
I completely agree that having him in the building definitely changes the perspective of, hey, what are we going to do if Lincoln doesn't work out? We'll see. I really don't think that that's the answer. I think Pete would be there to be the first one to go, I think we should go here and mention a coach's name, and I'll do everything I can to help get him there. But we certainly don't want Lincoln Riley to leave. I want him to be successful, as we do any coach in any situation that they're in. Well, guys, we've talked about Elvis a little bit, and Sun Records, going back to the 50s with hula hoops, and what a joy it was for me to listen to the two of you make comparative notes with C.R. Roberts and his tremendous career early on in Trojan history and his influence on the nation and what he was able to do. So thank you both for that. And then for the Take 5 portion of it, where we take 5 games and we want to look at what's coming up here on the schedule, whether it be in the collegiate or the NFL ranks, thank you both for that. So on behalf of Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, I would like to say thank you to Steven Travers for being with us. And this is his show now. We're going to call it Take 5 with Steven. So Vincent Turner and myself, I'm Harper LeBel. We want to say thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, the Steven Travers edition called Take 5. And for everybody else that's watching here today, that's the end of today's show. We appreciate you being a part of it. Thank you very much, and have a great and fantastic day, everybody. Thank you for tuning in.